At my granddaughter's first-month party, my daughter-in-law leaned in, smiled at me in front of the guests, and whispered that I was nothing but a parasite. She had just served me a plate of salad she prepared herself. I didn't flinch, but something in her eyes felt colder than poison. I spent years holding this family together after my son died, and this is what I get. But what she didn't know is that I already knew what she put in my food. What happens when a mother stops forgiving and starts defending herself? This is not just a family story. This is survival. I didn't touch the salad. I just smiled, set my fork down, and reached for my glass of water instead. The sun was warm on my shoulders, but I felt nothing but ice spreading under my skin. The backyard was filled with balloons, white chairs, and people who barely knew the baby we were celebrating. Vera, my daughter-in-law, moved gracefully through the crowd in her champagne-colored dress, smiling like she belonged on a magazine cover. But when she leaned down toward me just minutes earlier, her voice had been soft and cruel. "You're nothing but a parasite." I had heard insults in my life. I've lived through poverty, grief, war, and raising a son on my own while building a company from scratch. But never had someone looked me in the eye, at a party I helped pay for, and said something that sliced so deep without raising her voice. And yet I said nothing. I simply nodded and let the moment pass, though every nerve in my body screamed otherwise. People think the older you get, the softer you become. But I've learned the opposite. Time doesn't dull the blade. It sharpens your sense of when to strike. The baby, my granddaughter Ruby, was asleep in her bassinet under a canopy of pastel streamers. I loved her the second I saw her. She had my son's eyes, and when she yawned, her whole face crumpled, just like his used to. I had fought to be a part of her life. After my son's funeral, Vera stayed away for almost a month. No calls, no updates. And then, out of nowhere, she texted to say she was moving into my house until she figured things out. Just like that. At the time, I thought it was the right thing to do. I told myself she was grieving, that she was pregnant, that it was what my son would have wanted. But now, looking around at all the strangers Vera invited, the photographers, the catered tables, and the way she kept referring to everything as her vision for the day, I understood. This wasn't a gathering for Ruby. This was Vera's coming out party, and I was the prop she needed to look good. She had already tried to guilt me into selling the company my husband and I spent 4 decades building, said it would be selfish not to cash out now and help pay down the $11 million in debt her husband had left behind. But I refused. Not just because of the promise I made to my late husband, but because I knew, deep down, that giving in to Vera would never be enough. She wanted control, not help. And when she didn't get it, she changed. The first signs were small: a missing bottle of medication, cold coffee left on the stove, even though I never drink it that way, passive-aggressive little jabs about how tired she was from doing everything on her own. Then came the legal letters from her lawyer, hinting at guardianship claims for Ruby, questioning my mental fitness, citing made-up details about confusion, forgetfulness, emotional instability. That was 2 weeks ago, and now she handed me a salad. I looked at the plate again. The dressing was light, almost colorless, but I noticed the fork was already resting in the lettuce when she brought it. She had prepared it ahead of time. I leaned back in my chair and looked across the yard. Mabel, our housekeeper for over 20 years, was standing by the buffet table, folding napkins. Her eyes met mine, just for a second. Then she looked away. She knew something. I'd always said Mabel was quiet, but not blind. So I excused myself. Walked past the guests, past the laugh track music Vera had picked out, and into the house. I put the salad plate into a sealed container, marked it with the date. Then I made a call. The rest of the afternoon passed like any other suburban event. Photos, cake, fake compliments. My granddaughter slept through most of it, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around her. When the sun began to dip, people started to leave. Vera made sure to walk each guest to their car, kiss babies, and flash her perfect smile. No one saw her dig her nails into my wrist earlier that morning when I brought Ruby her blanket. No one heard the things she said when she thought no one was listening. But I had, and I remembered every word. This isn't going to be a slow story. I won't drag you through years of tension or play the helpless victim. That's not who I am. I don't throw glasses or scream in kitchens. I watch. I document. And when it's time, I move. So ask yourself this, while I tell you the rest. What would you do if you knew your daughter-in-law had tried to poison you not once, but was planning to do it again? And no one, not the police, not the neighbors, not even the court, would believe you unless you had proof. Because that's where I was. And the next time she tried, I'd be ready. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid. I've known fear. This wasn't that. This was calculation. At 6:15 the next morning, I placed the sealed salad container inside a small insulated bag and drove it to Dr. Felicia's office. She wasn't just a physician. She was my husband's cardiologist and a trusted friend. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. Enough to make her run the tests without asking too many questions. By 11:30, she called. She sounded steady, professional, but I could hear the tightness under her voice. She said the substance they detected was digoxin, a cardiac glycoside. In high doses, it could stop a heart. In low, repeated doses, it could induce arrhythmia, fatigue, confusion, even death if no one caught it in time, especially in someone my age. She told me the amount in that salad was not lethal, not yet. But if I had eaten similar doses 2 or 3 more times, the outcome would have been different. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stood there in the middle of my kitchen, holding the receiver in one hand, looking out the window at the same garden where Ruby would one day learn to walk. I stood very still, like my body already knew something inside me had changed for good. By evening, I had replaced all the locks on the back storage cabinets. I installed a small safe in my bedroom closet, tucked behind the coats I never wore. Inside, I placed the printed lab report, the flash drive with the call recording, and the name of the contact Felice had recommended at a private lab in Vermont. Someone who specialized in medical forensics and private consultations. The next day, I made an appointment. I also paid a man named Doyle, a retired police tech, to install 3 discrete cameras around the kitchen and dining area. He didn't ask what I needed them for. Cash made sure of that. At dinner that night, Vera asked what I'd done all day. Her tone was casual, but her eyes stayed locked on mine too long. I told her I'd gone to the bank and reorganized some paperwork. She tilted her head slightly, like she was trying to read past my face. Then she smiled and told me she'd made tea. Chamomile. Just for me. I thanked her and took the cup upstairs with me. I didn't drink it. Instead, I poured it carefully into a glass vial and labeled it. Date, time, room. That was Tuesday. By Friday, I had 3 more vials, all marked, stored, and transported to the lab in Vermont without Vera ever noticing. Each one tested positive for low-level digoxin. Not enough to alert a hospital, not enough to cause a full-blown episode, but enough to build something far more important. Pattern. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Not without a structure, not without a net beneath me. In war, and make no mistake, this was a war, You never waste a strike. You wait, you build, you make sure the blow you deliver cannot be denied, walked back, or forgiven. Late that Saturday night, I was returning the baby monitor to its charger when I passed by Vera's bedroom. The door was cracked. I heard her voice, low, bitter. She was on a video call. I paused. She was speaking to someone named Rena, and I only caught parts of the conversation, but enough to know she was laying groundwork. She spoke about how hard it had been living with me, about how I resented her, how I'd started forgetting things, mixing up names. She said it wouldn't be long before the lawyers and the court agreed she was the better guardian for Ruby. She was building a case, a false one. But paper looked real until you burned it. The next morning I cooked breakfast, French toast, bacon, fresh berries. I laid it out while Vera was still upstairs. I waited until she came down in her robe, bleary-eyed but smiling. She told me I didn't have to cook. I said I wanted to. I said I appreciated everything she was doing for Ruby. She looked at me like she didn't trust a single word I'd just said. Good. I needed her to think she had the upper hand. I needed her to keep playing her part, because soon I would ask her to do it again. One more dose, one more act of confidence, and then I would strike. It was Sunday afternoon when I decided it was time to set the final piece in place. The weather was calm, that soft kind of overcast that made everything feel heavier. I spent the morning cleaning the kitchen, wiping down every surface slowly and methodically, not because it was dirty, but because it calmed my hands, the way other women used to knit. I cleaned. Vera had taken Ruby to the park with her friend Rena. I knew they would be gone at least 2 hours, just enough time. I went into the pantry, reached behind the box of steel-cut oats no one touched, and pulled out the camera box. 3 compact recorders, each no bigger than a deck of cards. Fully charged, set to motion, no flashing lights, no sound. One went in the spice cabinet, angled down toward the counter where Vera liked to make tea. The second above the fridge pointed toward the island. The third I installed underneath the upper cabinet, just above the sink. It had a wide lens. It would catch anything she did at the stove, the kettle, the cutting board. Every movement, every flick of her wrist. I tested them all. They were silent, clean, ready. By the time Vera came home, I was reading in the sunroom. She brought Ruby in asleep, cheeks flushed from the wind. I looked up, smiled gently, and said nothing. That evening, I made sure to stay downstairs longer than usual. I folded laundry where she could see me. I asked if she needed help with Ruby's bath. I offered her a slice of pound cake I had baked earlier. She refused all of it, politely, tightly. Around 9:15, she disappeared into the kitchen. I didn't follow. I didn't hover. I just waited. At 9:23, she brought up a mug of tea. She tapped on my door softly. I opened it and thanked her. She said she hoped it would help me sleep. She smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. I waited until she went back downstairs, before setting the mug gently on the tray table near the window. I didn't touch it. Not this time either. By midnight, the cameras had already uploaded the footage to the backup cloud I had configured with Doyle's help. When I reviewed it the next morning, I saw it all. The unsealed bottle, the pinch between her fingers, the moment she glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was watching, the small, practiced stir with a spoon, the mug placed precisely on the tray. And then, nothing but calm, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I saved the video. I downloaded 2 copies to flash drives. One I placed in the house safe. The other I mailed to Reggie with a simple note. Do not open unless I instruct you. That afternoon I prepared my own tea, poured it into a travel thermos, drove straight to Felice's clinic. She examined it quietly. Professional. Methodical. The next day, she confirmed it. Digoxin again. Slightly higher dose than the last two. Still not lethal. Still undetectable to an untrained eye. Still something that, if mixed into food or drink 3 or 4 times, would seem like natural decline in an elderly woman. And by the 4th time, likely irreversible. She looked at me carefully across her desk. I told her I had a plan. She didn't ask what it was, but she nodded. 3 hours later, I called Mabel. I asked her to return for the week, told her I needed help with Ruby while I sorted through some legal paperwork. She agreed immediately. Mabel had worked for our family for over 20 years. She wasn't just staff. She was loyal. She had witnessed more than anyone else and said less than anyone I knew. When she arrived, I sat with her in the breakfast nook, handed her a printed photo of Vera standing in the kitchen with the mug. I explained nothing, just looked her in the eyes and asked one question. She inhaled sharply. Her face didn't change, but her eyes darkened. Then she nodded. I asked her to do one thing. That evening, I made sure to be in the living room when Vera brought the baby down for a nap. I told her I was tired, that I would take a cup of tea upstairs, that I appreciated her making it. She said, of course, just like always. I took the mug, carried it up. This time I brought it to the guest room instead of mine. I set it on a tray and asked Mabel to stand by. Vera never saw the switch. Mabel had made an identical cup of tea using her own set, same mug, same colour, same smell. I took that one and drank it slowly in the kitchen. Vera was unloading the dishwasher, back turned. I made sure she heard the sound of ceramic touching the table. I made sure she heard me sipping. Then I left the mostly empty mug in the sink. And I waited. The next morning I set the trap. A small brunch, just the 3 of us. I served her eggs and toast, coffee in her favourite cup. Then, right as we sat down, I smiled and said, almost offhand, I feel better this week. The tea has helped a lot. I think I'll stick to that blend from now on. Her hand paused mid-air. Then she smiled. Too quickly. That afternoon, I met Reggie at the bank. I signed over a portion of the estate into a temporary trust. Made him co-executor. Gave him access to the video files, the lab reports, the documentation, and instructions for release. If anything happened to me over the next 3 weeks, he was to deliver everything to the authorities and call the press. By the time I went to bed that night, the tea mug was back on my nightstand, untouched, and I knew I had her. The envelope came in a plain manila sleeve, no return address, just my name in small typed letters across the front. It was slid under the door sometime before dawn. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. Still, I walked it to the kitchen, sat down with a cup of black coffee, and sliced it open with a butter knife. Inside were 3 documents. One was a petition for temporary guardianship over Ruby, citing neglect and emotional instability on my part. The second was an affidavit, supposedly from one of Vera's old friends, claiming I had been seen talking to myself in the backyard late at night. The third was a medical note, unsigned, referencing ongoing cognitive concerns and potential signs of early-stage decline. It was clever, dirty, but clever. The unsigned medical note was especially cruel. My husband had spent the last 2 years of his life losing pieces of himself. I had watched it all unfold in silence. The slippage, the repetitions, the soft confusion that eventually hardened into full disorientation. We had never spoken about it. Not directly, but he knew, and so did I. Vera knew that too. She had taken the thing that hurt the most and twisted it into a weapon. I placed the papers back in the envelope and walked them to the safe. I didn't panic, not even a flicker, because I was already 10 steps ahead. Reggie had warned me she might try to file preemptively. He had flagged her contact with a family lawyer who had a reputation for playing fast and loose with evidence. What she didn't know was that Reggie had a connection inside the clerk's office. If she filed anything officially, I would know within the hour. But this envelope was just a threat, a signal, a rehearsal before the real performance. Later that morning, while she was out with Ruby, I logged into my email and opened a separate drive where I stored copies of my most important files. I uploaded the camera footage from 3 different angles. I cross-referenced it with the lab results from Dr. Felice, matched the timestamps, and added a written summary. I titled the folder "For Law Enforcement Use Only" and set Reggie as the second administrator. Then I sat back and thought about what Vera's next move might be. She had tested my food, my tea. She had built a soft narrative of my decline, carefully crafted through whispers and false smiles. She had forged or paid for false affidavits. And now she had begun sliding threats under doors. She wasn't panicking. She was positioning, which meant I needed to force her to escalate, to feel just enough pressure that she would tip her hand publicly. That afternoon, I had lunch delivered from her favorite Thai restaurant. I made sure the bag had her name on it. I placed it neatly on the kitchen counter with a note that read, "Just because we don't always get along doesn't mean I don't care." She read it. She didn't say thank you. But later, I heard her on the phone with Rena, laughing. She said maybe I wasn't so far gone after all. Exactly what I wanted. That night, I left my phone in the living room on purpose. Open calendar, clear reminders. I wanted her to see my upcoming meeting with my financial advisor, a name she wouldn't recognize, a location that looked official enough to matter, a subtle breadcrumb, carefully placed. The next morning, while I was out, Mabel called me from the house line. Her voice was low, tense. She said Vera had gone into my room. She had watched from the hallway. Vera had opened the bottom drawer of my desk, looked through several folders, and taken photos with her phone. She had closed everything back exactly as it was. Almost. She had missed one paperclip. Mabel noticed. She always noticed. I told her not to move a thing. That night, after Vera went to sleep, I checked the drawer. Nothing had been stolen. But the photos she took included the names of 3 donors listed under the trust my husband and I had set up. She must have assumed I was planning to transfer the company early, or worse, that I had already done it. I hadn't. But that gave me an idea. I drafted a short letter on company letterhead, one that suggested a transition of leadership was in discussion, pending final approval. I dated it carefully, added a blank space for signature. I folded it neatly and tucked it into the middle of a file titled Strategic Contingencies. I didn't hide the folder. I left it where she could find it, right behind a decoy labeled Holiday Recipes. Sure enough, the next afternoon she went for it. I was in the garden, pruning the rosemary. The baby monitor was on, but Vera thought I was out of earshot. She had just finished a call. I couldn't make out the full conversation, but I heard enough. She told whoever was on the other end that she had evidence, that Lorraine was preparing to shift company ownership behind her back, that she would be left with nothing, that she needed to act quickly. The words weren't frantic. They were measured, like someone reading from a script. I walked back inside, made a pot of coffee, and waited. Around 5, she came down with Ruby in her arms. She asked if I had made any plans for the weekend. I said no. She smiled and said we should have dinner together, just the 2 of us. She said she wanted to make things right. I agreed. That evening, while she bathed Ruby, I pulled the file she had photographed, and replaced the Strategic Contingencies document with an official notarized letter of non-transfer. It stated clearly that the company would not be sold, transferred, or restructured prior to the reading of my final will. I made sure the language was strong, unmistakable. Then I returned it to the drawer. This time, I closed it with an obvious crease, just enough to make her check again. By bedtime, I saw her in the hallway with her phone. She was reading something, scrolling slowly. Her face was unreadable, but her fingers trembled slightly. She knew time was running out, and that meant the next move would be hers, the last mistake, the final dose. I was ready. The last Saturday of the month began like any other. I was up by 6, had my coffee by 6:15, and walked the garden path by 7. Ruby was still asleep upstairs. Vera was in the shower. The air felt colder than usual, but I liked it that way. It helped me think. By the time I came back inside, Mabel was already in the kitchen arranging sliced fruit on a tray. I didn't say much. She didn't need me to. Our rhythm had returned easily, quiet, but steady. That kind of understanding only comes with years. She handed me a sealed envelope and told me it had come in yesterday's mail. No sender, no postmark, just like the last one. Inside was a printed draft of a guardianship petition, more elaborate than the last. This one was addressed to a judge I happened to know personally, someone I had once served on a hospital board with for nearly a decade. I looked at the signature line, still blank. A warning, again, but now bolder. This was no longer a bluff. Vera was preparing to go forward. I returned the papers to my study and opened the folder of hospital records I had requested a week earlier. I had them printed under a confidential third-party name, sent through Reggie's contact. It took some string pulling, but I had them. They were my son's. The official report had always listed his death as alcohol-related trauma from a high-speed collision. What had never sat right with me was the way his body failed so quickly, the way the doctors struggled to explain why his system had reacted the way it did. I remembered his skin tone, the strange grey that didn't match the cause. Felice helped me request a toxicology re-examination. It wasn't a full forensic autopsy, but it gave me a clearer picture. The lab results showed that hours before the crash, my son had trace levels of a compound in his system, one known to amplify the toxicity of alcohol in the bloodstream. Not lethal on its own, but in combination, deadly. It would impair motor coordination faster than expected, even at moderate drinking levels. The substance was unregulated, common in certain prescription compounds, and according to Felice, often present in cardiac medications that Vera once had access to. She had said he drank too much that night. She said he was depressed, reckless. She cried at the funeral. I remember how she sobbed into my shoulder, saying she didn't understand why he had gotten in the car, said she had begged him to stay home. I believed her. I wanted to. But now I saw it differently. The argument they had earlier that day, the missing prescription bottle that no one looked for, the fact that she never pushed for an investigation. It all came back with new meaning. I closed the file, folded my hands in my lap, and sat still for a long time. That night, after Ruby had gone down, I made tea. For myself, for Mabel, and for Vera. She didn't hesitate. She took the cup, said thank you. She even smiled. We sat across from each other in the den, fireplace flickering behind us. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the occasional crack of wood. I watched her carefully. Her posture, her eyes, the way she looked at me like she still thought she could win. She talked about her new resume, about how she was looking into real estate. She said it calmly, confidently, like a woman who had nothing to hide. Then, without any change in tone, she said she had contacted a family lawyer for advice, just to be prepared, in case anything ever happened to me. She said it softly, like she was doing me a favor, like she was planning ahead, like any good mother would. I didn't flinch. I told her that was responsible of her, that I was glad Ruby would have someone thinking long term. Then I excused myself, took the empty teacups to the kitchen, and poured mine into a vial I had hidden under the sink. Later in my room, I sealed it, labeled it, sent Mabel a text that simply read, "Confirming last vial. Thank you." The next morning I received a call from Felice. She had the analysis. The digoxin levels were nearly 3 times higher than the previous ones, still not fatal, but high enough to induce a cardiac event in someone frailer than me. High enough to be deadly if consumed 3 times in the same week. She told me to be careful. I told her I was done being careful. That evening, I met Reggie in person. I gave him everything. All the files, all the recordings, all the toxicology reports, the rewritten guardianship documents, the falsified affidavits, the screenshots of Vera's texts with Rena, recovered from a backup I had quietly set up weeks ago with Doyle's help. I told him I wanted everything reviewed by an external legal team. No one connected to our family, no one who knew my husband. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted strategy. Reggie agreed. He said he would begin preparing an injunction, not just to block the guardianship, but to initiate an investigation. He said we had enough now to raise criminal suspicion. Maybe not to arrest, but certainly to draw attention from the right people. That was all I needed. I returned home just before 10. The lights were off in Vera's room. The baby monitor was silent. I walked past her door, stopped, rested my hand lightly on the frame. Then I kept walking. I slept with my window open that night. The cold air cut through the room. Clean, quiet, real. It was the first deep sleep I had had in months. By the time Tuesday came, the air had shifted. Not just outside, though the clouds did hang lower than usual. There was something colder in the house, too. A silence that no longer felt neutral. Vera moved around like someone who had already won. I noticed it in the way she closed cabinets without sound, the way she spoke slower, like she was rationing her words carefully. She had started packing. Not openly, not in suitcases, but I saw the signs. A pair of earrings missing from the tray, folders removed from the bookshelf in the office. Her winter coat gone from the hook by the back door. She was planning something, and she thought I didn't know. She even started cooking dinner, 3 nights in a row. On the 3rd evening, she made roasted chicken. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic, but I barely tasted it. Not because I suspected anything. She didn't bother trying again. That part of her plan was over. I think she knew she had pushed it far enough. Now she wanted to clean her tracks, soften the edges. After dinner, she sat across from me at the table. Ruby had already gone down. The dishes were cleared. She brought out a folder, placed it between us, and slid it forward without a word. Inside were pages of typed schedules, feeding times, doctor appointments, milestones. Then came printouts of real estate listings, modest homes in nearby towns. One in particular was circled, 2 bedrooms, fenced yard. Ideal for new families. She said she had been thinking it was time to give me space, that Ruby needed her own room, that she had found a place closer to the preschool she wanted. She spoke with quiet kindness, the kind that stung more than any insult. I nodded. Let her finish. She said she would be taking Ruby with her at the end of the week. Friday, probably. She said it like a casual plan, like a hair appointment, like it wasn't the final move in a long, calculated game. Then she thanked me for everything, for my hospitality, for my patience, for understanding that it was time for the next chapter. I told her she was right. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't challenge a single word. I simply folded the schedule, placed it back in the folder, and said I hoped the house she picked had good light. Ruby liked windows. That night, after she went upstairs, I called Reggie and told him we were moving forward. The next morning, the papers were filed, an emergency petition for injunction, accompanied by a motion to investigate guardianship fraud, elder endangerment, and attempted harm with intent. Everything was in the file. The lab results, the video footage, the intercepted texts, the falsified documents, and most importantly, the timeline. By noon, the clerk had processed it. By 4, Vera received the notice hand-delivered to the front door. She opened it in the living room. I was sitting in my chair by the fireplace, reading the same page of a book I hadn't been able to focus on for days. She stood still for a long time. Then she walked out to the porch, phone in hand, pacing. 10 minutes passed. She came back in, didn't speak. That night, she didn't cook. She didn't come downstairs at all. The next morning, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway just after 10. 2 plainclothes officers stepped out. Calm, professional. They asked for Vera by name. She answered the door herself. They didn't cuff her. They didn't raise their voices. They simply handed her a formal notice of investigation, informed her of her rights, told her she was not under arrest, but advised not to leave the county until the matter was reviewed. She closed the door behind them and leaned against it. When she turned around, her face had changed. Not fear, not sadness. Something colder. Anger without the fuel. Rage already spent. She asked me if I was proud of myself. I didn't respond. I stood, walked past her, and went into the nursery. Ruby was awake, kicking gently in her crib. I picked her up, held her against my chest, and whispered the alphabet softly while her breathing steadied. That evening, Reggie called to confirm the court had approved the protective measures. Vera would be prohibited from relocating Ruby until the hearing. She could not remove the child from the house without written consent. She could not represent herself as sole guardian in any legal or medical capacity. Everything was on record now. No more shadows, no more subtle moves. She didn't come to dinner. She stayed in her room. At midnight, I walked past her door and saw the light on. Her suitcase was open on the bed, clothes half folded, laptop open. I kept walking. In the quiet of my own room, I took out the old music box Victor had given me the year we finalized the patent for our first medical device. I wound it once, just to hear the soft notes. Then I placed it back on the shelf. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. But the storm had begun to break, and I had survived the wind. The sun rose sharp and clear the next morning. A cold light came through the windows, stripping away any softness that might have made the day easier to swallow. I woke before the baby stirred. Vera's door was closed. The hallway was quiet. I went to the kitchen and brewed a pot of coffee. The act was mechanical. It had been weeks since I drank anything hot without second-guessing the taste. But this morning, I poured it anyway, strong and bitter, and sat at the head of the table. Mabel arrived just before 8. She had the morning paper tucked under one arm and wore the same grey wool coat she had since the year my husband died. She nodded, calm as always, but her eyes flicked toward Vera's empty chair. She didn't ask. She never did. By 10 o'clock, Reggie had arrived. He wore a navy overcoat and carried a leather portfolio pressed tightly under his arm. I led him into the den, where we had arranged the chairs and table the night before. Quiet, clean, with a tray of glasses and a carafe of water placed off to the side. The documents were stacked neatly, labeled, color-coded. Vera came down at 10:37. She wore her best dress, hair pinned back, light makeup. She looked prepared for something she didn't fully understand. Behind her walked two members of the company's advisory board. They had received a formal invitation from me 3 days prior. The subject line had been simple: clarification of control and succession planning. She had no idea what she had walked into. She greeted them as if she had expected them, asked if they wanted coffee. No one accepted. Reggie opened the meeting with a measured tone. He explained that given recent legal activity and concerns over custodial arrangements, the family trust was initiating an internal clarification of authority over Whitmore Medical Holdings. Vera's face tightened at the phrase, internal clarification. She crossed her legs and folded her hands in her lap. I let Reggie speak for the first 10 minutes. Then I stood. I thanked everyone for coming. I explained that my husband's wishes had always been clear, that the company would remain under family stewardship until it was passed into a permanent charitable structure upon my death, that no transfer, sale, or restructuring could occur without both medical and legal clearance verifying my full incapacity. That clause had been notarized years ago. My husband had insisted on it. Then I passed around the most recent lab reports, the footage stills, the handwritten summary. Each attendee reviewed them silently. The room grew still. Vera shifted, said nothing. I turned on the small screen placed at the end of the table. The footage played. No sound, just movement. Her hands, the mug, the white powder, the casual turn of her wrist. Her back turned to the hallway, but the camera caught the angle clean. One board member looked away. The next clip showed the second dose. Different day, same behavior. Then the third, and the fourth. When the final clip faded to black, I turned off the screen and sat down. No one spoke for a moment. Reggie cleared his throat and read from the injunction. The details were plain. The guardianship petition Vera had drafted, the false affidavits, the unsigned medical claims, the digital trail traced to her lawyer's office. Vera's voice cracked as she said the word coincidence. She said the footage was misinterpreted, that the powder was a vitamin supplement, that she had always acted in the best interest of the family. She looked at me. Her voice softened. She said I had misunderstood, that grief had made her clumsy, that she had wanted to help, that perhaps she had overstepped, but never with harm in mind. I said nothing. The board members were polite. One excused himself to take a call. Another asked if Ruby was upstairs. Mabel answered yes. She had been listening from the hallway like she always did. She knew when to step in. Reggie handed Vera an envelope. Inside was a signed release form, stating that she would be stepping down from any advisory capacity in relation to the company, that she would make no further claim to guardianship until the court reviewed all evidence, that she would be surrendering temporary custody of Ruby, effective immediately. She refused to sign. So I stood again. I walked to the side table, picked up a second folder and handed it to her. Inside were transcripts of her phone conversations, extracted from backup data, the full conversations with Rena, with her lawyer, with the private investigator she had quietly hired to look into my finances. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then, finally, she sat back and folded the folder closed. She signed. She didn't cry, not in front of us. She didn't plead. There was no apology, just the sound of pen against paper and the quiet snap of the folder being returned to the center of the table. The meeting ended at noon. The board members left quietly. Reggie stayed behind to pack up the documents. Vera went upstairs without a word. I sat by the fireplace again. The same chair, same view. The fire was low, the embers still red. By evening, Vera had packed 2 bags. She left before dark. No goodbye, no promise to return. Just the sound of the door clicking shut, and then nothing at all. The silence after she left was not the kind that lingers painfully. It was the kind that settles deep, the kind that tells you something toxic has finally been scraped out. The house breathed easier without her in it. I could hear it in the stillness of the hallways, in the way the floorboards stopped creaking at odd hours, in how the baby monitor no longer felt like a surveillance tool. Mabel stayed the night. She made soup, fed Ruby, cleaned the nursery without being asked. At one point, I caught her humming under her breath, the same melody she used to sing to my son when he was a baby. I didn't say anything. I just let her keep humming. Some sounds don't need acknowledgement to mean something. By morning, Ruby woke early. I held her longer than usual, pacing the kitchen while the kettle whistled. She watched me the whole time, eyes wide, still too young to understand what had shifted in the air around her. But I believed she felt it. Children always do. I spent the afternoon reviewing the documents with Reggie one final time. The guardianship orders were locked in. The medical evidence was stored in multiple secure locations. The footage was filed under both civil and criminal reference logs. Reggie said the prosecutor's office had begun looking into formal charges, though no one had reached out yet. I told him I didn't care whether they did or didn't. This was never about the headlines. What mattered was that she could no longer touch what wasn't hers. The following evening, I opened the drawer where my husband's will had sat for years. The envelope had yellowed slightly around the edges. I unfolded the pages slowly, rereading his handwriting in the margins. He had written everything with the precision of a man who had built things with his hands. His last notes were not sentimental. They were instructions. He wanted the company passed to no one. He wanted it absorbed into something bigger than us. He wanted it to serve, and I had delayed long enough. That night, I drafted the transfer documents. Reggie would complete the formal filing, but the language would be mine. I renamed the holding into a transitional trust, the Whitmore Institute for Public Healing. Its assets would be directed to community medical initiatives, with oversight from a neutral board composed of health professionals and ethics scholars. It would outlive me. That was the point. I didn't want the legacy to sit in the hands of someone waiting to sell it. The next morning I drove to the lake. It was a place I hadn't visited in years. My husband had built the dock with his brother when they were both in their 30s. We used to bring our son there in the summers, long before the business had consumed our time. I stood on the dock, letting the cold wind press against my face. I didn't cry. That part of me had gone dry long ago. But I breathed deep, let the air fill the places Vera had tried to hollow out. Back at the house, I opened the closet where I kept the old music box. I wound it again. This time, I let it finish the full tune. The melody felt slower now, like it too had aged. But it still held shape. Mabel joined me in the nursery that evening. We didn't talk much. She helped with Ruby's bath, then folded laundry while I rocked the baby. At one point, she looked over and asked if I was sleeping better. I said yes, it was the truth. The next week passed without noise, no letters, no calls, no surprise visits. The absence was its own answer. On Friday, I received an envelope in the mail. It was from Vera's attorney. Inside was a brief letter stating she would not be pursuing any further guardianship claims. No apology, just one sentence about her intention to relocate. There was no forwarding address. I placed the letter in the safe, next to the footage and the lab reports. Not out of fear, just for completion. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't announce it to Reggie. I didn't even tell Mabel. But that night, after the house was quiet, I wrote one more letter. This one was for Ruby. She wouldn't read it for years, but I needed to write it now, while the memory was sharp. I told her the truth, simply. Not the details, not the poison, or the lawyers, or the video, just the essence. That her mother had been sick in ways no child should carry, that I had protected her not out of anger, but out of love for her father, that I had made mistakes, that I had waited too long to see what was already in front of me. But once I saw it, I did not let it stand. I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it behind the photo of her father on my bookshelf. The house slept easy that night, and so did I. 3 weeks passed before the knock came. It was mid-morning, grey skies pressing low over the roof, the kind of cold that settles behind your knees and stays there. Mabel was upstairs changing Ruby. I was in the dining room sorting receipts for the foundation paperwork. I heard the knock once. Firm, measured, then silence. I opened the door to find a man in a dark coat, badge clipped to his belt, folder in hand. He introduced himself simply, said he was with the district attorney's office. He asked if I had a few minutes to speak in private. I led him into the den, closed the door, and waited. He didn't sit. He stood near the fireplace, flipping open the folder as if he already knew what he would find inside. He said they had received the packet from Reggie, said they had reviewed the footage, the toxicology reports, the witness statements, the timeline, said they had cross-referenced it with hospital records, including the fatality report from my son's accident. They had questions. He was calm, but direct. He asked about Vera's access to my prescriptions, about her role in the household, about her statements regarding my health. I answered every question. I had rehearsed this moment for weeks in silence. Then he asked about the day my son died, what I remembered, what I knew, what I suspected now. I kept my voice steady. I told him the truth, that I had doubted myself for too long, that grief had clouded my judgment, that I didn't want to believe a woman carrying his child could also carry that kind of intent. He nodded slowly, took notes, said they weren't at the stage of charges yet, that the statute of limitations was complex in cases like this, but the fraud and poisoning allegations were active and ongoing. He said the case was open. When he left, I stood at the window for a long time watching his car disappear down the long driveway. I didn't feel relief, not yet. What I felt was something more still. The quiet knowing that once set in motion, truth doesn't stop rolling forward. Later that evening, Reggie came by with the official confirmation from the court. The Whitmore Institute had been granted full legal transfer. The company name had changed in the registry. The trust was now live. It no longer belonged to me. Not really. But I would oversee it until my last day. He handed me the final binder, heavy with signatures. I opened it slowly. The title page bore both our names. My husband's legacy, now etched into a public service. Reggie asked if I wanted a press announcement. I said no. Let the work speak for itself. The next morning, I walked Ruby to the park. She had started noticing the world in small bursts. Her fingers followed shadows on the pavement. Her eyes lit up when dogs passed. I held her tighter than usual, not out of fear, but because I could finally walk without looking over my shoulder. Back at home, I placed the framed letter from my husband on the mantel. It had lived in my desk drawer for too long. It was time for it to be seen. His words were simple, clear. His faith in me had never wavered, even when mine had. The following week, I received a call from the hospital board. They asked if I would consider returning in an advisory role, part-time. They had heard about the trust. They wanted someone with experience and conviction. I accepted, not for prestige, but for movement. Something had to keep going. I spent afternoons in meetings, mornings with Ruby, and evenings in the garden where the light returned slower but steadier. One Thursday afternoon, a certified letter arrived. From Vera. It wasn't handwritten. It wasn't warm. It was legal. Precise. Her attorney stated that she acknowledged the court's position. She would not contest guardianship or property decisions. She had relocated to another state. No return address provided. At the end of the letter, a line stood alone. She hoped Ruby would one day understand. I folded the page, placed it with the rest. Nothing else needed to be said. The air grew sharper as fall settled in. The trees turned the color of rust and blood. I prepared the house for winter, restocked the pantry, took out the storm windows. Life returned to its smaller rhythms. One evening, I found myself back at the fireplace, music box in hand, Ruby asleep upstairs. I turned the key, let the melody play. For the first time in what felt like years, it didn't sound like memory. It sounded like beginning. The first snow came early that year, light, tentative, brushing across the porch like it was asking for permission to stay. I stood by the window with a cup of warm cider, watching it settle over the lawn, the street, the silence. The season was shifting, not just in weather, but in me. My days had become steady. Mornings were for Ruby, afternoons for my work with the hospital board, and evenings for the foundation. The Whitmore Trust was no longer just an idea. It had started supporting programs for women in crisis, especially mothers who had no support systems after loss. The first shelter it funded had just opened in Lakeford, with 5 families moved in. I sat with those stories at night. They made me feel less alone. But peace is rarely uninterrupted. That Thursday, I was in the garage organizing old donation boxes when the motion light outside flicked on. It was too early for Reggie, too late for a delivery. I walked to the side door and opened it slowly. Vera was standing in the driveway. She wore a long black coat, unzipped. Her hair was tied back tight, face pale, eyes unreadable. Her arms hung at her sides like they had no purpose. I didn't speak. I waited. She took a slow step forward and stopped. Then another. She didn't ask to come inside. She just looked at me like someone who hadn't spoken out loud in weeks. When she finally did, her voice cracked. She said she knew I probably hated her, that maybe she even deserved it. She said she had nothing left. She had no fight, no direction. She wasn't there to explain or ask. She said she wanted to see Ruby. The words landed like stones. I didn't respond right away. I looked at her, not with rage, not with pity, but with something else. Tired understanding, not forgiveness, not yet. But the recognition of someone who had been emptied by life and still crawled back to the place they had broken. I told her Ruby was at daycare, that she was healthy, that she laughed when the wind hit her cheeks, and she loved peanut butter too much for her own good. Vera nodded once. Her eyes stayed fixed on the garage floor. She asked if she could sit down. I pointed to the bench by the fence. We sat there, the two of us, in the cold. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for sympathy. She just said she was sorry, not for what had happened to me, but for who she had become. She said that after the hearing, after the trust became public, after the quiet whisper of her name in legal circles, she had lost every piece of her old life. She said she tried to rebuild, couldn't. She was working night shifts in a care facility 3 towns over, No one knew her there. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. She asked if she could help. Not with money, not with work, but quietly, behind the scenes, sorting mail for the trust, or packing hygiene kits for the shelter. Anything. She said she didn't want her daughter to grow up thinking her mother disappeared. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Instead, I told her to come back next week. Same day, same time. If she still felt the same, we would talk. She stood, nodded again, and walked back to the car. I watched until the taillights disappeared. That night, I sat in the study and opened the old ledger from the company, the final entries before I'd signed it all away. There was my husband's handwriting, still steady, even in the last months. His notes in the margins, his vision, careful and full of hope. He had always believed people could change. I had not. But maybe change doesn't come from belief. Maybe it comes from watching someone strip themselves of everything that kept them comfortable and choosing to show up anyway. I closed the book and turned out the light. The next week, Vera returned. She didn't knock. She waited on the bench. I brought her a pair of gloves. It was colder now. She accepted them without a word. We worked in silence that day, packing food boxes for the shelter. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She followed my lead. And when she left, she whispered thank you, like someone who knew what a second chance really cost. I didn't say goodbye. I just nodded. Something inside me had changed too. And I realized then, the revenge, the revelations, the court battles, the exposure, none of it had been the point. It was about reclaiming the space I had been pushed out of. Not the house, not the money, but the right to define what family meant on my own terms. And if Vera wanted to learn that, really learn it, maybe that was the beginning of something better. Not perfect, but better. The days moved slowly after that, not heavy or painful, just deliberate. I kept my hands busy, filing grant paperwork for the foundation, reading bedtime stories to Ruby, making soup in silence. There was peace in the stillness. But it wasn't the quiet of absence. It was the quiet after a storm, when you start to notice your breath again. Vera returned every Thursday. She never came early, never asked for more than I offered. She showed up with sleeves rolled up, eyes clear. Some days we packed hygiene kits. Some days it was food deliveries. There was never small talk between us, no catching up, no how have you been, just work. And a rhythm. I watched her closely, not because I didn't trust her, but because I was trying to understand something that had taken me a long time to admit. I didn't hate her anymore. That truth sat with me like a stone, not warm, not comforting, but solid, immovable. Hate had been useful. It gave me shape when I felt like nothing. It gave me language when the betrayal ripped my voice away. But hate doesn't hold up well under time. It cracks. And when the cracks widen, you're left looking at yourself, not the person who hurt you. And the truth was, I didn't want Vera to disappear. Not for me, not for Ruby. But I wasn't ready to forgive her either. One evening, after a long day of assembling winter kits, Vera sat in the back garden. She didn't ask, but I brought out 2 mugs of tea and set one beside her. We didn't speak for a while. The sun was dipping, the cold coming fast. The last of the leaves clung to the maple trees. Finally, she asked if she could tell me something. I let her speak. She said she had gone back to the house a few weeks after the trial, just to see it. Not to reclaim it, but to understand what she had destroyed. She said the porch had a loose step now. The yard was overgrown. But the strangest part was the silence. She said it had always been loud before, filled with footsteps and voices and arguments and music. But that day, it was still, like the house had gone hollow. She stood on the porch for 10 minutes and then she walked away. She said she had a dream recently. My son was in it. He was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the paper like he used to. She said he didn't speak. He just looked up at her once, nodded, and went back to reading. That was all. She didn't know what it meant, but she'd woken up crying. I listened, not with pity, but with a kind of reluctant softness I hadn't felt in years. Then I told her something I hadn't said aloud to anyone, that I had dreams too. In mine, I was holding Ruby at the edge of the water. The waves reached for us, but never quite touched. And my son was standing behind me, always behind, just far enough that I couldn't turn to see his face. Every time I tried, he would step back, disappearing into the horizon. But I never let go of Ruby, not once. Vera sat quietly after that. She didn't thank me. She didn't cry. She just nodded like she understood something that couldn't be explained. Later that week, I received a letter from the state board. The Whitmore Trust had been nominated for a Civic Impact Award. They wanted to highlight the emergency shelter work and the job readiness program we had launched for single mothers. I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time. Not because I needed recognition, but because it meant something had been rebuilt. Not just a name, not just a reputation, but something lasting. Something my husband would have been proud of. Something my son never got the chance to see. I shared the news with Reggie at the board meeting. He clapped twice and gave me a wink. "You should go," he said. "Take the stage. Let them hear you." I wasn't sure. The idea of standing in front of an audience again made my ribs feel tight. But then I remembered what Ruby had said the night before, when I tucked her in. She told me she wanted to be brave like me when she grew up. And I knew I had to do it. Not for the trust, not even for the mothers we served, but for the little girl who would one day ask where she came from and who fought to make sure she could stand proud in any room she walked into. I confirmed attendance the next morning. The ceremony would be held in early March, and I knew somehow that it would not just be an ending, but a beginning. The night of the awards ceremony arrived with a quiet kind of weight, not nerves, not dread, just awareness of time, of legacy, of everything that had led to that moment. I stood behind the curtain of the Municipal Hall's auditorium, my hands folded, listening to the speaker on stage describe the impact the Whitmore Trust had made in the last 18 months. Numbers rolled off her tongue. Families housed, mothers employed, emergency funds distributed. All accurate, all real. But none of it captured the nights I had stayed up with Ruby coughing in her sleep, or the way Vera's hands shook the first time she helped a mother into transitional housing. None of it captured the silence that used to live in me. Then my name was called. The applause was polite, respectful. I walked onto the stage slowly, deliberately, feeling the eyes of the room settle on me. I didn't look for Vera. I didn't need to. I stood at the podium and waited until the room quieted. And then I spoke. I didn't read from the card they had given me. I didn't talk about program goals or fiscal year outcomes. I talked about what it meant to survive betrayal, what it meant to rebuild. Not just an organization, but a life, a self. I talked about grief that doesn't ask permission and love that chooses to stay, even when it hurts. I said the most radical thing a woman can do after being discarded is to remain standing. I said I was still here, and I wasn't going anywhere. The room went still, not heavy, not somber, just still, like a breath held at the edge of something sacred. When I stepped down from the podium, A few people stood, then a few more, until most of the room was on their feet. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just nodded once and walked back behind the curtain. Vera met me there. She didn't say anything, just placed a small folded envelope into my hand and stepped back. Later, in the quiet of my car, I opened it. Inside was a photo, not a new one, an old one, a picture of my son, arms around Vera's shoulders, both of them laughing at something off camera. Ruby wasn't born yet. I remembered that trip. It was up at Big Bear. Cold morning, hot coffee, the smell of pine. On the back of the photo, in Vera's careful handwriting, it said, "I know what I took. I am trying to give back what I can." I sat there for a long time, the envelope in my lap, until Ruby stirred in the back seat. I looked at her in the rearview mirror, her eyes still closed, her mouth slightly open in sleep. She had no idea what had just happened, no idea the weight of that night. But one day, she would. One day she would know everything. And maybe, just maybe, she'd tell her own story. Not with bitterness, not with shame, but with the calm, unshakable voice of someone who came from women who survived. I drove home slow that night. The city lights blurred past me. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt real, for the first time in a long time. And in the quiet of that moment, I promised myself something. That whatever years I had left, they would be mine. Not in hiding, not in bitterness, but in full color, alive, awake, and unafraid. If this story found something inside you, something tender, something raw, something unspoken, then maybe it's because you've been there too, or know someone who has. These stories are not just mine. They belong to all the women who stayed silent for too long. If you felt seen, heard, or simply moved, let me know. And if you're still holding your own pain in quiet corners, I hope you find your way out of the dark, one step, one breath, one choice at a time. You deserve that. You always did.